Remember when you were a kid and it'd be a few days after Halloween and all your good candy was gone and you had to choose between things like Bit-O-Honey, Smarties, black licorice, or those weird wax lip things that you weren't sure were even edible? Well, that's kind of what this video is. This is a video of players you probably don't want to start if you don't have to, but if you're in a pinch, you could. I have identified some under the radar players that have advantageous matchups that could come through for you in week 9. Now, I do want to be very clear here. I'm not saying these are must starts. I'm not even saying there may be good starts. These are guys that if you're desperate through bye weeks, injuries, whatever the case may be, they are in spots where they do have upside. They're certainly risky, but they do have upside. So if you're desperate, you can consider them. And let's start with Bam Knight, running back for the Arizona Cardinals, facing that terrible Dallas Cowboys defense this week. Look, really surprising coming out of the Cardinals bye. They cut Michael Carter, who had been the backup running back. Now, they did re-sign him to the practice squad, and I think there's a chance that they elevate him for this game and that he is still out there. But it shows that they have confidence in Bam Knight. Even before the bye week, they showed they had confidence in Bam Knight. You look at it in that game before the bye week, Bam Knight played 47% of the snaps, handled half of the rushing attempts, and ran a route 28% of the time, and had 14.7 expected fantasy points. Now he comes out of the bye again, looking like clearly the lead running back here with them cutting Michael Carter, and he gets a fantastic matchup against the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys are allowing the second most fantasy points to running backs, only behind the terrible Cincinnati Bengals defense, but also they're allowing the third most fantasy points on those man gap runs at 5.2 yards per carry on those runs. The Cardinals have been one of the most man gap heavy teams as far as run schemes go this year, and you look at it outside of Trey Benson, who is injured right now. Bam Knight has been the best running back on these schemes. He has the second highest yards per carry, granted only 3.14, but it's still second best on the team, and the highest success rate at 52.4%. This is a matchup against this Cowboys run defense that Bam Knight can certainly take advantage of. He's clearly the RB1 in this offense now. I really like Bam Knight. I'm locked Bam Knight into quite a few of my lineups as an RB2 this week where I'm missing guys like, Breece Hall or Quinshon Judkins. I think Bam Knight can come through for you this week in a great spot. Now, I'm going to cheat here and give you two players, and that is Kareem Hunt and Brashard Smith. Now, we know Kareem Hunt probably going to be the lead back here. Isaiah Pacheco, they're saying week to week, almost certainly not going to play here. You probably feel like, I don't know if you feel okay about Kareem Hunt, but you know about Kareem Hunt. But I want to talk a little bit about Brashard Smith because I think he's another guy you should not sleep on this week as the Chiefs are facing the Buffalo Bills, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. And you look at it for Brashard Smith here in weeks 1 through 6, he only played 13% of the snaps, only had 5% of the attempts, and only ran a route on 10.4% of the dropbacks, and only had 4 expected fantasy points per game. But what have we seen over the last 2 weeks? We're starting to see him get more involved here. You look at it over the last 2 weeks, he's played 25.7% of the snaps. He's handled 23.9% of the attempts, even more than Kareem Hunt, although Kareem Hunt did leave one of those games with injury. And he's ran a route on 15% of the dropbacks, and he actually leads all the Chiefs running backs in expected fantasy points per game over the last 2 games at 10.1. Also, this is a great schematic matchup for him, specifically against this Buffalo run defense, because you look at it, he has 80% of his rush attempts are zone rush attempts. I've talked about it a couple times now. The Bills are allowing the second highest yards per carry on zone runs, 5.7 yards per carry, and they've allowed the most touchdowns on zone runs. Now, this doesn't mean I'm out on Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt still gets 51% of his runs are those zone runs, and the Buffalo defense, especially against the run, is not very good here, and I do expect Kareem Hunt to still be the lead back, to still get the bulk of the touches, and probably score a touchdown because that's what he does. But Brashard Smith gives you that pass catching upside. I mean, he's certainly the preferred pass catching back here. And with Pacheco likely out, this is a great spot for Smith to get more run, get more work in one of the best offenses in the NFL. So I think both of these guys are in play. Certainly I prefer Kareem Hunt, but if you're desperate, Brashard Smith can come through for you in a pinch. But I'll tell you what else. Speaking of Kareem Hunt, I'm going to take his line on underdog, his touchdown line, 0.5 rush or receiving touchdowns. Give me the higher on that. Come on, this guy does that every week, even if Pacheco plays. In this matchup with no Pacheco, yeah, he's definitely going to do that this week. And go ahead and pair that line with the Josh Allen new customer free pick you're going to get if you join Underdog for the first time using promo code ENDGAME. that's an easy way to get a win right off the bat. Not to mention, if you put these picks together and play just $5, Underdog is going to give you $100 in bonus cash, win or lose. Plus, when you sign up using promo code ENDGAME, they're going to match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. It's a great time to try Underdog. Just make sure when you do, you sign up using promo code ENDGAME. All right, we're going to get a little bit riskier here. We're going to start with Samaje Perine versus the Chicago Bears. But look, you might need Samaje Perine this week, and we've seen his usage trend up the last 2 weeks. You look at it over the last 2 games. He's played 40% of the snaps, had 34.8% of the rush attempts, and ran a route on 31.8% of the dropbacks. But last week, it went up even more. He played 43.1% of the snaps, handled 39.1% of the attempts, and ran the same amount of routes as Chase Brown. Now, this has not led to, a ton of fantasy production. He did have that long touchdown last week, but still, this shows us that he's at least involved enough, and he gets a great spot this week against the Bears. Because when you look at it, Samaje Perine is the guy the Bengals use on those zone runs. 64.5% of his attempts are the zone runs, whereas Chase Brown, only 43% of his attempts are those zone runs. And on those zone runs, he's smashing 6 yards per carry with a 70% success rate. The Bears allow the 5th highest yards per carry on zone runs, and they're just terrible against the run in general. Now, I do want to say, this does not mean I'm worried about Chase Brown or I'm out on Chase Brown. This is still a smash spot for Chase Brown. The Bears are also horrible against man gap runs. They're just horrible against all runs. In fact, they're actually worse against man gap runs. So you're still locking Chase Brown into your lineups. But I think Perine is involved enough now, and he's in a good enough matchup that, again, if you're desperate in a deep league, he's got a chance to score, he's running routes, and in this matchup, it's a good schematic fit for him. Go ahead, take a chance on Perine if you need him. And I think you should also take a chance on Emmanuel Wilson this week going up against Carolina Panthers, again, if you need him. We've seen it the last 2 weeks with Josh Jacobs dealing with this calf injury. They've relied on Emmanuel Wilson a little bit more. In the last 2 games, he has 17 carries, 5 catches. Now, granted, that's only resulted in 82 total yards. Not spectacular here, but at least we've seen the usage. And look, last week, he got even more involved. He played 41.3% of the snaps, handled 42.3% of the attempts, and ran the same number of routes as Josh Jacobs, and actually had more expected fantasy points than Josh Jacobs last week. Now, one of the big reasons for that was they didn't really need Josh Jacobs last week, so they were able to kind of scale back his usage. But guess what? They're probably not going to need him again this week, as they are 13.5-point favorites at home against the Carolina Panthers. If Josh Jacobs is still on the injury report dealing with this calf injury, we could see more Emmanuel Wilson than anybody with Josh Jacobs wants to. And again, this is a good matchup for Emmanuel Wilson here, because you look at it, 62.9% of his runs are zone runs. He averages 5.23 yards per carry on those runs with a 68.2% success rate. And the Panthers are currently tied for the 3rd worst yards per carry against zone runs at 4.9. So again, Emmanuel Wilson with Josh Jacobs dealing with this calf injury, and maybe the Packers not feeling like they need to pound the rock with Josh Jacobs continually. I think Emmanuel Wilson, another guy you can look to this week who could potentially get more touches than normal because of Josh Jacobs' injury and game script. So it's a good matchup for Emmanuel Wilson. Again, you got to be desperate here, but that's what this video is about. So if you are desperate, take a look at Emmanuel Wilson. And hey, real quick before I get to the rest of the names on this list, just want to ask a big favor. If you've been watching the channel and you are still not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It's not looking good for us right now. We need all the help we can get. So if you could spare 1 second out of your day and hit that subscribe button, we would greatly appreciate it. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. I don't have a ton of great options for you, but look, I kind of like Cooper Kupp this week going up against the Washington Commanders. Right now, Washington allows the 3rd most fantasy points to slot wide receivers and the 2nd highest yards per target to slot wide receivers. Kupp currently playing out of the slot about 51% of the time here. Also, Washington plays the 8th most man coverage of any team, and Kupp has been really good against man coverage this year. You look at it among Seattle wide receivers, he leads the team, yes, even ahead of JSN, in terms of targets per route run against man coverage. He's 2nd in yards per route run against man coverage and 3rd in fantasy points per route run against man coverage. Now look, of course, Cooper Kupp is very risky here because this is still JSN, clearly the alpha, clearly the number 1 here. But look, we're looking for guys who can be sneaky starts, hidden gems, desperation starts. Cooper Kupp in this matchup against Commanders, who struggle against the slot, play a lot of man. He's got potential this week. And then look on the other side of that same matchup, I kind of like Luke McCaffrey this week. I mean, certainly he's very risky here, but look, Seattle runs zone at the third highest rate, about 80% of the time this year, and McCaffrey ranks 5th in fantasy points per round versus zone. Not 5th on the Commanders, 5th among all pass catchers, ahead of guys like Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, Emeka Egbuka. He's been very, very good against zone. And now we know Terry McLaurin already been ruled out here. Sure, I like Debo, and I do like Zach Ertz. I'm going to talk about him in a second here. But if you're looking for help, wide receiver 3, flex, we have seen Luke McCaffrey have some nice weeks this week. He's got touchdown upside. It sounds like Jaden Daniels is going to play. So I know Luke McCaffrey was dropped in many, many leagues after doing nothing, and Terry McLaurin coming back. Go see if he's still out there. If he is, he's got potential this week as a desperation start. And then last week, I talked about Alec Pierce, but I'm going to go back to the well this week playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, last week, he did have 69 yards, but sadly, only 2 catches. But one of the things I did talk about was that big play ability. Unfortunately, he wasn't targeted more outside of that big 50-yard catch, but he's always got that potential. And this week, he gets arguably an even better matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. There are a couple things to really like here about Alec Pierce. Number one, he plays almost entirely on the outside. You look at it here, 90% of his snaps, he takes them on the outside. Also, the Steelers are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers that are lined up on the outside, so this is a good schematic matchup for him. Plus, the Steelers play the 3rd most single high of any team. 63% of the time, they are in single high. He ranks 12th among all pass catchers in fantasy points per route run versus single high. So sure, he's risky. He's kind of boom bust, but he always has a chance for that big play, and this is a great matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I know he didn't boom last week, but he's always got that chance, and it's not like he's completely boom bust. He at least gives you a little bit of a floor. So if you're looking for a home run in your flex spot this week, maybe you're behind in your matchup, or maybe you're just favored to lose quite a bit, go ahead, throw Pierce out there, see if he hits on a long touchdown this week. All right, let's move on to tight end. I got a couple of potentially sneaky starts tight ends for you. I talked about Zach Ertz. I like him in this matchup against Seattle. First of all, the main thing to like about here is that Terry McLaurin is out. You look at Ertz in those games Terry has missed this year. He's 2nd in target share. He's tied for 2nd in terms of end zone targets, and he runs 56.4% of his routes out of the slot. It's like him and Debo are the 2 slot wide receivers here. Now, Seattle, it doesn't get crushed by slot wide receivers, but they are allowing the 11th most points to wide receivers or pass catchers coming out of the slot. But what I really like is they play the 2nd most too high. They're in this formation about 62% of the time. You look at it this year, Zach Ertz is 3rd among all pass catchers in fantasy points per route run versus too high. Right behind only Jackson Smith-Njigba and a guy who's not even playing anymore, Darren Waller. He's ahead of guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Michael Pittman, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, his own teammate. And on the team, of course, not only does he lead the team in fantasy points per route run against too high, but he also leads the team in targets per route run against too high defense here. And he's 3rd in yards per route run. This is a sneaky good spot for Zach Ertz. The Seahawks have very good outside corners, assuming they're healthy this week. They kind of funnel everything short and over the middle. And with Jaden Daniels back and Terry McLaurin out, there's going to be opportunity for Zach Ertz this week. So if you need a tight end and he's sitting on your bench, or maybe he's on your waiver wire, take a chance on Zach Ertz. But now a tight end that is probably readily available in almost every fantasy league is Pat Freiermuth this week facing the Indianapolis Colts. Colts quietly have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends this year. And over the last 2 weeks, he's been more involved than Jonnu Smith. You look at it over the last 2 games, he's got a 14% target share, Jonnu Smith only 12.9. He also plays in the slot 67.5% of the time. Now with Austin back last week, that number did drop down a little bit to 56% of the time, but he's still in the slot more than half the time. And that's good because the Colts give up the 4th most points to pass catchers lined up in the slot. Now the Colts do have a very good slot corner in Kenny Moore, but he's probably going to spend more time on slot wide receiver Calvin Austin rather than tight end Pat Freiermuth. And when you look at the Colts linebackers here, Jermaine Pratt and Zaire Franklin, they're among 2 of the lowest in terms of Pro Football Focus grades in coverage. This is a sneaky good spot for Pat Freiermuth. He's been more involved lately. Look, he's probably out there in almost every fantasy league. Yes, it's risky because he's Pat Freiermuth, but I think he's got sneaky upside in week 9 if you're desperate at the tight end position. But you know what doesn't have sneaky upside? Watching all of our content that can help you win in week 9, because it's just got tons of obvious upside. So if you've missed any of our videos this week, don't worry. You can find them in our week 9 playlist right here.